Hi, this is Dark Journalist. Today I have an exciting show for you with influential Ancient Mysteries author Michael Cremo. Now, Michael has made a huge impact with his compelling research into the hidden history of humanity. His classic book, Forbidden Archaeology with Dr. Richard Thompson, gave us an entirely new view on the early origins of the human race. Now, Michael Cremo is no stranger to controversy, having put forward compelling evidence that human beings existed on Earth millions of years ago. His challenge to the scientific community is to stop suppressing evidence that supports the reality for a far different version of history than we've been taught. Is the modern world ready for a radical redating of our history? Here we go. Forbidden Archaeology author Michael Cremo, The 10 Million-Year-Old Secret.
The ancient Sanskrit writings, especially the Puranas, speak of 400,000 human-like species scattered throughout the universe. The description of the Vimana used by King Shalva, who was kind of on the dark side. This Vimana would appear several places at once, some extraterrestrial technology.
You know, the leap forward in high technology that's occurred in the last century should have given us a far better idea of our early origins and development than we currently have. Academia and the scientific community has played it safe and been satisfied to ignore or even suppress evidence of an advanced culture existing in prehistory. Today, there are too many indications of human beings existing and possessing high culture and advanced spiritual development in a forgotten early epoch. Will the true story of humanity come to light? Let's go ask Forbidden Archaeology author Michael Cremo.
Dark Journalist. Go for truth in 2017. The deepest questions, the biggest secrets, the darkest mysteries. Dark Journalist. Go for truth. With top guests like Graham Hancock.
Graham, how do we as a society escape the grip of the deep state in the 21st century?
Rather than spending trillions of dollars every year on building up our armies and our weapons of mass destruction and creating a climate of hatred and fear and suspicion, we should be uniting as a human race.
Catherine Austin Fitz.
Catherine, what is the issue that's holding us back and destroying prosperity?
We have a system which is got a negative return on investment. It's killing human productivity, and where it's going is inhuman.
Linda Moulton Howe.
Linda, you've been fighting against secrecy your whole life. How are we doing in this battle?
There is a kind of energy and synergy that you and I have because we are both trying so hard in so many facets to get to the bottom of what is the truth.
Dark Journalist. Go for truth. Visit darkjournalist.com and subscribe now for a special winter discount available for just $39 for 1 full year. You'll receive exclusive member benefits, including access to the complete high-quality audio archives to stream or download at your convenience, and subscriber-only content, including bonus show material. Sign up for our free newsletter to stay updated on the latest shows. Dark Journalist. This is the year. Now is the time.
You know, we need dark journalists, so just keep doing what you're doing.
Join us now and go for truth.
Well, hello everyone. We're just coming off some amazing archaeological revelations by Carmen Bolter in a recent episode. And today we have Michael Cremo, whose work is really the gold standard for breakthrough research on prehistory. Now, he's shown that so many facts presented by the scientific establishment are, in fact, largely incorrect. In a series of books, he's presented evidence and artifacts that point to a much older date for civilization. Now, this is Michael Cremo's first appearance here on Dark Journalist, and I can tell you I'm excited to have him here. And we're going to look at his impressive research and his latest revelations also. I have one word for you, Vimana. Okay, so quick reminder here to sign up for our newsletter at darkjournalist.com so you don't miss any of the exciting shows that we have coming up for you. Michael, it's terrific to have you here. Of course, your work is a great inspiration for anyone investigating the hidden history of the human race. Now, your classic book, Forbidden Archaeology, came out around 20 years ago, a little over 2 decades, and it sent shockwaves through the public. It appeared to show evidence that was suppressed of human beings evolving millions of years ago. Now, when you look back at that major breakthrough and you fast forward 2 decades to where we are now, how do you think we've done with those major revelations that you brought forward? Do you think that we're more informed now? Or do you think that we're so distracted that we're losing sight of some of these bigger questions?
It appears, as far as I can see, to be growing. The whole topic of alternative history and alternative archaeology, it seems to be expanding.
Uh-huh.
I think if you look at the cable TV shows, there seem to be a lot of series with an archaeological focus. Uh, it seems to be an expanding topic. Of course, that's just my perspective on it. Maybe others have a different perspective.
Sure.
What do you think?
Well, it's an interesting question. I definitely have two minds about it. That's why when I get the chance to speak with someone like you, or Graham Hancock, or others who really set the stage in the last 2 decades for a worldwide awakening about our ancient past, I often wonder if you or any of them are happy with the progress that we've made, some 20 years later. Or in this case with you and your breakthrough revelations, do you feel we should be further along somehow?
Well, I think there's a lot of room for progress
Okay.
in these areas: alternative history, alternative ideas about human origins and antiquity. In the mainstream scientific world and the mainstream education systems, it seems there's been very little progress. As far as people in general who have access to so many different forms of communication today, the information continues to mount and expand and be discussed and be presented. But in terms of having some impact on the controlling institutions of human society, I would say a lot more needs to be done.
I can definitely appreciate that. It seems like we get up to a certain stage of understanding in culture, and public curiosity surges forward. And then there's some setback, like 9/11, like the financial crash in '08, and suddenly fear is in the air, and deeper understanding just seems to take a back seat. So we're back where we started from. Now, one question for the average person listening to you discuss these powerful ideas. You say that your research redates our human origins by millions of years, while mainstream science sticks to the fact that, they say we've basically been around in the last 200,000 years or less. What is the fundamental significance of your conclusion versus theirs?
I think the real significance of that is it means we need new explanations for human origins. And the alternatives that are being put forward in the alternative circles, we'll call them, tend to involve non-material principles, some idea of consciousness having an existence apart from matter. I mean, most scientists today, they would say consciousness is produced by chemical interactions in the brain. But I think those who are looking at alternative ideas are looking at the idea that the conscious self has its own independent existence.
Right.
And you also get into ideas involving extraterrestrial intelligence, some kind of overall guiding force in the universe, and ideas like that.
Definitely true.
Which would, if they were the main ideas in human society, they would result in different kinds of political, cultural, and economic and financial institutions. We might be putting much more emphasis on developing the resource of consciousness rather than the development and exploitation of material resources, and trying to dominate and control them in the context of competing groups in the world, which leads to a lot of environmental degradation. It leads to conflict on all levels of human society and so on.
Absolutely.
So I think the kinds of ideas that are out there in the alternative circles, if they were integrated more into the mainstream scientific and educational institutions, would result in a different kind of society, a different kind of worldwide human civilization with different kinds of cultural institutions, political institutions,
Uh-huh.
Financial institutions, and things of that sort. So I would say that although I'm happy with the progress that's being made in general of this kind of information circulating among all different groups of people all around the world through so many different means and modes of communication, I don't think it has impacted up to this point the dominant political, economic, financial, and social institutions that are dominant in the world today.
There's no question that if we become more enlightened on some of these subjects, let's say psychic awareness or off-world cultures, mystery schools, higher consciousness, and that realm of information, these dominant institutions then, their control grid loses some of that iron grip. And yet more and more it seems that that outcome is almost inevitable, unless they resort to some heavy forms of censorship, as they're certainly capable of doing. Now, when you look at our society, the way it's set up, and you think about the deep academic work that you've done to get us to think about our history in a totally different way, what kinds of changes would you like to see, from this greater access to powerful information, like what's in your classic book, Forbidden Archaeology?
One big thing I would like to see is some changes in the education system, whereby these alternative ideas would be given some place in the educational institutions where new generations of leaders, political leaders, economic leaders, social leaders, and so on, are being trained, scientific leaders. Now, the supporters of the now dominant materialistic scientific ideas have a government-enforced monopoly in the education systems around the world, which pretty much has the effect of delegitimizing or marginalizing the kinds of alternative ideas that I and so many other researchers are representing.
Right.
And I think that is something that is eventually going to change, because I don't think it's a very stable situation where you have vast numbers of people accepting things completely different from the ideas that are being forced on people through the government-controlled education system and scientific institutions. I don't think that's something that can go on forever, where there's such a disconnect between what people think and what attracts them and what they tend to believe personally and what's being taught in the state-controlled education systems and scientific institutions.
Absolutely. I completely agree. The more they ignore some of this vital information, the more transparent their contempt for the truth becomes.
Yes.
Now, you famously coined the term knowledge filter. This is very interesting because what it means essentially is if a finding comes up that changes the paradigm around our understanding of ancient history, for example, let's use the weathering pattern on the Sphinx that shows it was carved in 10,000 BC, not 2000 BC. That's geological information that's been available now for 25 years, but Egyptology just didn't accept the findings, even though it was proven. So that's just not included in the history books. So there is a filter there on this academic institutional level, which says if there's discovery that goes outside of our comfort zone of information, then we're simply not going to accept it.
Yes, you mentioned the word paradigm. That was popularized by the historian and philosopher of science Thomas Kuhn in his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolution. So this idea of knowledge filtration that Richard Thompson, my Forbidden Archaeology co-author, and I made use of is kind of related to Kuhn's work in the sense that he was also proposing that the overall mindset of a particular scientific discipline, the overall mindset that they have regarding the questions that are important and the methods of researching them. And he called that overall mindset a paradigm, and things that fit within the paradigm, they kind of, in my terminology, pass through the knowledge filter very easily, whereas evidence that radically contradicts the dominant paradigm tends to be filtered out.
Right.
By which I mean it becomes ignored, it becomes set aside, or explained away in a very facile way, or in some cases actively suppressed.
Right, and that has the effect of making it so that we're not really considering the full set of facts when trying to decide on these important questions in science or consciousness or archaeology.
Right.
Now, I have a few ideas about why this is the case, but I'd really like to know, based on your deep research, how do you think this happened and where it became, commonplace for scientific study to exclude inconvenient facts?
Again, I think the reason why it's like that is a few centuries ago, science, as it was forming in the West, made a decision to focus on ordinary matter, how it operates according to mathematically expressible laws.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back 3 or 4 centuries, even in Western science, you'll see that scientists were dealing with all kinds of paranormal topics, non-material substances, consideration of powerful intelligent forces in the universe that are in some part responsible for some of the order and complexity that we see around us. But at that formative stage, science made a decision to focus on ordinary matter operating according to mathematically expressible laws.
Right. So when this happened, how did it change the role of science and the character of their findings?
By focusing on that, they were able to gain a lot of understanding and control over the ordinary material elements, which led to them being able to give many kinds of technologies and other things to the world.
I see.
They were able to give weapons to governments, and governments were willing to subsidize them heavily for weapons production. That was going on several centuries ago. It's still going on today. They were able to give the world consumer products that corporations could profit from the sale of. And today, if you look at universities, they're actually big consortiums, between corporations, the government, particularly militaries, and the universities, producing, doing research that results in the production of weapons, the production of consumer products that can be sold on a massive scale, and pharmaceuticals that can be sold and marketed on a massive scale. And you wind up with a society that is based as having most people simply working very hard to produce and consume more and more material things, while those in control of the political and financial and military and economic institutions kind of ride on the top of that and exploit it so they get more of the benefits of the whole system than anybody else. But everybody is actually benefiting from it in one way or another.
So by dumbing down our outlook on a day-to-day basis and closing off our questioning of higher realities, we became essentially more productive for their version of a material utopia, their kingdom of materialism. So you're saying basically that the more inspired ideas, deep thinking, expansion of consciousness, these are the things that they came to see as a threat to having this intense control.
Right. Most of the alternative ideas that we're talking about lead kind of away from that, from that attempt to make the control and exploitation of matter the main purpose of human civilization.
Right.
You were mentioning the work that was done in Egypt. Well, where does that really lead to? If you get an older date for the Sphinx or an older date for the pyramids, it leads you to the idea that their civilization was older. And then you begin looking into the Egyptian civilization, for example, and you learn about their ideas about the origin of life and the origin of the universe, and their idea of a conscious self that can survive the death of the body, reincarnation or metempsychosis. And you learn about their esoteric wisdom systems and things like that. And it kind of leads you in an entirely different direction where, if you had a civilization that was based on the idea that, say, we're all beings of pure consciousness, we're all related to each other, no use in dividing ourselves up into so many competing groups. The main purpose of life isn't just to control and dominate and exploit matter and other people.
Yeah.
It's to raise consciousness to a level where involvement with matter can be, transcended. Then you would have a society based on the principle of, well, let's satisfy our material needs in the most simple, natural, and efficient way possible, and have an economic system that's based more on equality, not on overproduction and overconsumption. Just what we need to keep our consciousness fit for the higher goals of raising consciousness and appreciating our relationship with all other conscious beings, rather than dividing ourselves up into so many completing conflicting groups. It would be an entirely different kind of civilization or society with different goals.
Right.
And it wouldn't be something that, it would really shake up the whole political, economic, cultural, financial situation of the world today. And I think ultimately, that's why you find such resistance to the kinds of alternative ideas that many researchers are looking into today, because they lead in that direction. And you could say the political, military, economic, and financial interests are relying on the scientific community to keep those kinds of ideas intact. That's why they will resist.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. It's an entire worldview that they're keeping intact.
Right.
And that applies to archaeology, sociology, and conditioning in our society, because if we realize, for example, that ancient civilizations, as you've said, had a much better grasp on their consciousness, they were more related to a spiritual life, we might look back and say, oh, our ancestors were these spiritual beings, and we want to emulate that. And there goes your modern commercial-driven society.
Yeah, I mean, if people decided to put less human energy into material production and consumption and more energy into developing the resource of consciousness, that would mean the GNP would go down. And even if it goes down a few percentage points, there are huge crises among the financial and economic and political and cultural institutions that are now dominant in the world today.
Right.
And I mean, that's what I think is ultimately, behind the kind of resistance that we see to alternative ideas, whether we're talking about research into the paranormal or research into the existence of extraterrestrial beings, or research into forbidden archaeology, or research into the idea that there might be some cosmic intelligence that's responsible for some of the order and complexity that we see around us. That if we look at the fine-tuning of the universe for life to exist in it, that there might be some intelligence behind that. It might not just be an accident. So those kinds of ideas, if they became dominant in the world's scientific and educational institutions, would lead to huge changes in the social, political, cultural, financial institutions that we see in the world.
Well, when your book on forbidden archaeology originally came out, I think you must have made some of those social engineers very nervous. First off, you had examples of coins in there that were 200,000 years old. Now, that's one level of changing your mind about how ancient societies functioned and how far back our root origins go. But on the more profound level, you had examples of a metallic sphere, for example, from South Africa that showed signs of manufacture. And that's dated at 2.8 billion years old. Now, can you tell us about it?
Yeah, well, this is one of the more extreme examples. It's actually included in a special appendix of Forbidden Archaeology, because for the most part, most of the material in the main part of the book was reported in scientific journals and things like that. But we also had a little appendix of things that we called extreme anomalies that might not necessarily have been reported in professional scientific publications. And these round metallic objects from South Africa were in that category. And we called them metallic because an analysis was done of them, and they were made of a kind of iron ore. So they're round. The most interesting feature is they have parallel grooves that
Yeah.
go around the center of these objects, and they look like they were made artificially. Artificially in the sense that there was some kind of intelligent being that made those grooves. And they were given to an independent company of metallurgists to examine, and they said they couldn't see any way in which those grooves could have formed naturally. And later, after Forbidden Archaeology was published, I went to South Africa and I met the chief mining engineer from the mine where these objects come from. They come from a mine near a place called Ottosdal in the western Transvaal region of South Africa. And he showed me a block of stone with several of these objects embedded in it. Some of them were kind of halfway protruding out of the surface of the stone, and you could see the grooves going back into the solid rock. Like you can see an object protruding halfway out of the stone. It had the grooves on it. You could see the grooves are going back into the solid rock. So, of course, I sat in, Forbidden Archaeology, and I still say this, that if anybody can convincingly show me how these grooves could have formed naturally, then, well, I'd accept that. But up to this moment, nobody has really showed me in a convincing way that those grooves could have formed by some natural process. So as far as I'm concerned, it's still a possibility that we're looking at some kind of artifact that was made by someone with human-like intelligence a couple billion years ago.
Wow. Amazing. Yeah, it's just incredible.
That's one of the more extreme anomalies.
It's always, yes, I've always been really struck by that one because that really shakes up our view of ancient history. And when we come back, we'll do some more shaking up of the past as we explore your research on the relationship of the ancient Vimanas from Vedic texts to modern UFO encounters. The parallels are staggering. But what does it mean? We'll find out when we come back. Final round of part 1 here with Michael Cremo. Stay with us.
Go deeper with Dark Journalist. Subscribe now and you'll have access to the complete audio archives to download or stream at your convenience. Receive advanced updates and discounts on Dark Journalist events. Enjoy exclusive subscriber-only content. Go deeper with Dark Journalist. Visit darkjournalist.com and subscribe now for a special winter discount, available for just $39 for 1 full year. Dark Journalist. The truth is never easy.
As they were sitting there filming, a little saucer came from, I say a little saucer, it was a saucer, came flying over their heads, put down 3 little landing gear and landed right out on the dry lake bed. And they picked up their cameras and started over toward it, filming as they went. And when they got in fairly close to it, it lifted up, put the gear back in the wheel wells, tipped up, and took off at a great rate of speed.
Dark Journalist will go there.
You know, the leap forward in high technology that's occurred in the last century should have given us a far better idea of our early origins and development than we currently have.
Hidden technology.
So in other words, the possibility exists that you have here a machine that is manipulating magnetic fields on a planetary scale that has nothing to do with particle physics.
The black budget.
But there's no such thing as getting away from the corruption because it is literally, it is now integrated into every economy in the globe.
Geoengineering.
I'm talking about right down to the DNA level. Imagine that you have now put microprocessors and sensors, along with everything else, into every human body.
For more deep interviews, special reports, and documentaries, visit darkjournalist.com today. Dark Journalist, the truth is never easy.
And we are back. This is Dark Journalist, and I'm speaking with Ancient Mysteries author Michael Cremo. Now, Michael wrote the classic book on prehistoric findings that confirmed a much older date for human origins, Forbidden Archaeology. He's done a number of other books on the hidden history of the human race, and his groundbreaking research is giving us all a better look at what took place in antiquity. Now, one question I have for you, Michael, is, and I've heard you comment on this topic before, when there's a miraculous find that happens out of the dim fog of ancient history, such as the metallic disc that we looked at earlier, often people will say, well, it must be alien. They came here, they did some work here, they left behind some things. Or someone could come up with the hypothesis it was a lost civilization. They were advanced, Atlantis or Mu, for example. But you've pointed out it's not an either-or situation. In fact, often it's both things happening at the same time.
Yes, that actually is my position. A lot of my ideas, we haven't talked about this yet, but a lot of my ideas are inspired by my studies in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, which is one of the cultures that had these alternative ideas about human origins and the origin of life in the universe. And the ancient Sanskrit writings, especially the Puranas, which are the cosmological and historical writings, they speak of 400,000 human-like species scattered throughout the universe. And they also speak of a very ancient human presence on Earth. It has to do with the purpose of the universe. Why is there a universe at all?
Mm-hmm.
It's really a pretty amazing question. And according to the ancient Sanskrit writings, the universe as we experience it is kind of a little virtual reality system for conscious selves who aren't fit at the present moment to exist on what we might call the level of pure consciousness.
And this is so fascinating because on these unique levels, there are different things to perceive. And that brings us to the issue of Vimanas that are mentioned often in the Sanskrit writings. And they sound like a kind of high-tech ancient UFO. So you've pointed out that there are many different kinds of these Vimanas.
There are Vimanas on all the different levels. So there are some Vimanas made of pure consciousness. They're described in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India. There are Vimanas made of subtle mental and intellectual energies. They're described. And then there are also Vimanas made of ordinary material elements. And there are elaborate descriptions of these things in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India. And what's interesting is that modern UFO researchers, if you compare their observations to the kinds of descriptions that there are in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, you can see parallels. And most of the people who are reporting these modern UFO types of experiences have no knowledge at all of the Vimanas. Maybe today that's changing a little bit because the concept of Vimanas is becoming a little bit more widespread.
Right.
But say during the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, when a lot of these UFO reports began to surface, the people who were reporting them pretty obviously didn't have any deep knowledge of the ancient Sanskrit writings of India.
Yes. It would have been completely obscure for them.
Yeah, for example, there's the description in the Bhagavad Purana of the Vimana used by King Shalva, who was kind of on the dark side, to attack the city of Dwarka, which was inhabited by people, you could say, on the side of good. I mean, to turn it into, Star Wars type of terminology. But Shalva's airplane it's stated it was given to him by the engineer of the forces of darkness, Maya Donova. So it's kind of like some extraterrestrial technology transfer. Shalva was a king on this earth, on the side of the forces of darkness. So the higher powers of the forces of darkness gave him this aircraft, this spaceship, this Vimana that he used to attack a city on earth called Dwarka. And in the Bhagavad Purana, it's stated that this Vimana would appear several places at once, so that the people who were defending the city and trying to shoot it down couldn't tell where the real Vimana was.
Huh.
And this is really reminiscent of modern
Holograms.
military technologies, being able to give false radar images, or decoys that will confuse an air defense system.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And it also this craft had the ability to project, like you said, holographic images of soldiers on the ground, like false images, holographic images. I mean, it's really kind of amazing when you look at the detail of these descriptions and see how they anticipate modern military developments. So I don't think these are descriptions of something imaginary. I think they're descriptions of actual craft that existed and still exists today.
Huh. Yeah, I can see that.
As shown, I believe, by the credible reports of UFOs that come from a variety of sources, pilots, police.
Oh, absolutely. Sure. I mean, there are so many credible sources on the record. And of course, there are attempts to discredit UFOs from official sources in the media. We see that happen on such a regular basis. But it keeps coming back again and again because they're still flying out there.
That's right. And then ultimately behind it means, well, you've got intelligent, conscious life in other parts of the universe, which again starts leading in the direction of a consciousness-based rather than a matter-based picture of the universe. It tends to be suppressed because the implications of it just lead in this direction that the controlling forces of our modern worldwide human civilization don't want to go. I mean, it's just like the stones and the bones. They lead in that direction, which is why you want to keep them out of the textbooks. Or research into the paranormal, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, reincarnation memories, things of that sort. It's all kept out of the textbooks because it leads ultimately to the idea of a consciousness-based rather than a matter-based picture of the universe.
That's a crucial, that's a major knowledge filter right there.
Which has implications for how we live, what our values and goals should be.
Right, absolutely. And since we're talking about UFOs here, I want to ask you, now, when we look at people who research UFOs and study them and really interpret the phenomena as just a nuts and bolts kind of technology, And certainly there's a great deal of evidence to look at them that way. They conclude it's an advanced ship with a kind of super energy source coming in from a nearby galaxy, visiting here and studying us. Now, in your opinion, is that a misinterpretation of UFO reality?
Well, if you look at the mainstream UFO researcher world, you see there's historically been two groups. One is the strictly nuts and bolts variety, where they would see UFOs as being, just machinery, like our machinery, involving no other principles than the known laws of physics.
Yes.
And they would tend to see extraterrestrials as flesh and blood, nothing more than flesh and blood examples of organisms from other parts of the solar system or the universe. And then there's the other group that tends to recognize a paranormal element in the UFO experience and ET experience, that we're not dealing with just ordinary machinery. I mean, people report being, floated through walls and communicating telepathically with the extraterrestrial beings. They tend to be more of, you might say, extra dimensional beings, and the machinery that they use, their craft, appear to have abilities that go beyond the normal laws of physics.
Right.
I remember once in Germany, many, many years ago, I was giving a lecture about forbidden archaeology, and at the end, a gentleman came up and introduced himself to me, and he told me he was a pilot for one of the big American airlines. He told me he was flying across the Atlantic once, and he saw a UFO coming straight towards him, at a very high rate of speed, and then just before impact, it went straight up.
Yeah, that changes everything. Oh, it's pretty nerve-wracking.
You can't, an ordinary vehicle operating according to the laws of physics can't be approaching you at a high rate of speed and then suddenly just go at a 90-degree angle straight up.
No question.
So there's traditionally been in UFO ET circles, and I'm not, I'm more of a, I don't know what you would call it. I get into lots of things, my main field being archaeology, but it leads to a lot of other things.
Sure.
So I'm not strictly a UFO ET researcher, but my observation has been that historically there have been researchers who are of the nuts and bolts and flesh and blood school, but there have always been researchers who have looked more into the paranormal element of both the craft and the beings that are associated with them. And it would appear to me, just from my observations, that this second group is more dominant these days.
Very interesting. Yeah, there's no doubt that these are competing mindsets and that they both offer very compelling cases because UFOs are such an enigma. And we do see this overlap in some of the episodes of the History Channel's Ancient Aliens TV shows. In the episodes that you've been on, they're forced to look at other areas to explain the UFO reality and some of these ancient anomalies. Consciousness, you bring in this aspect, and you're such an expert on prehistory, lost cultures, Atlantis, very ancient culture. And, their whole mantra on the show is aliens did this and aliens have basically done everything. So you keep things very interesting when you're on there.
Right. Well, I did appear on several episodes of the Ancient Alien series, and I tried to get an idea across which really wasn't, you're interviewed for a segment and you may say a whole lot of stuff, and what actually gets on tends to be
a soundbite.
Yeah. Which is integrated into the overall narrative that the ultimate decision makers are trying to promote. But I was trying to get across the idea that we mentioned a little bit earlier, that you started out with, that one thing doesn't rule out the other.
Right.
The fact that there are flesh and blood types of extraterrestrials or nuts and bolts machines doesn't rule out the fact that there are also extraterrestrial beings that might be called extra-dimensional rather than simply extraterrestrial, or that there may be machines that are made of elements other than the chemical elements, and that are operating according to principles other than the known laws of physics.
Yes.
So I think there's evidence for both things. And, the way I put it to them when I was being interviewed is that I have an expanded conception of what extraterrestrial means. I think, yes, it does include flesh and blood types of creatures, the grays, the this, the that.
Oh, yeah.
But it also would include entities that different cultures have been aware of in ancient times, who would give them names like devas or jinn or gods or whatever, that the one thing doesn't rule out the other, and that, as far as I'm concerned, both types are there.
Yeah, that is the crucial realization, and the fact that in your decades of powerful research, you've come to that point of view after all those relics and all those kind of deeper realizations about it. That helps us get a handle on these very obscured realities. So, Michael, this is just amazing information. It's so great to have you here. We'll end part one here. And before we do, how does everyone follow your work? Now, what is your website now?
People can find on mcremo.com, mcremo.com.
And your books are all available there as well.
Yes, and as I said, there's this special offer for people who get from the website my latest book, My Science, My Religion. They will have the opportunity to request a free copy of Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the classic works of the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, which form the basis for a lot of my work.
Excellent. Michael, just great to have you here. What an incredible knowledge base you have, and that you've shared for people to discover things that fall outside of the realm of mainstream archaeological or scientific inquiry to these deeper truths. Now, in part two, we'll go even deeper. Rockefeller involvement in dominating ancient research, some of the amazing things that you've brought to light, including figurines found in the U.S. They date back to over 1 million BC. What's really happening here? Of course, Dark Journalist subscribers will get part two in their inbox next week. You don't want to miss it, so now is the time to subscribe. And Michael, I also want to say thank you for the impact that your work has had on me, because I've learned so much through the incredible knowledge and details that you've brought forward over the past couple of decades.
You're quite welcome.
It's made a huge difference.
Yeah, well, I think we're all doing our part, people who are doing the research and trying to represent these ideas in various circles, and those who are communicating the results of others' research to wider audiences like yourself. It's all part of a big community, I would say, and I'm happy to be part of it.
Fantastic.
Do my part.
Absolutely. Well, we wouldn't have it any other way. Thanks again for being on the show. And now we'll go to part 2. Everyone stay tuned. Thank you for joining me for this powerful episode with Forbidden Archaeology author Michael Cremo on the 10-million-year-old secret. You can find more deep interviews, documentaries, and special reports at www.darkjournalist.com. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel to receive the latest videos. See you soon.
Subscribe to our newsletter at darkjournalist.com to stay updated on the latest shows.